This is for the rule breakers, the rebels, those who aren't afraid to shake up the status quo. If you're living your life your way, or if you're not, but like listening to people who are, this podcast is for you. It's never too late to learn how to ruin your own reputation.
Welcome to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation, the podcast where I talk to people who have either chosen unusual jobs or are living lives that most people don't quite understand. And they're doing it unapologetically. I think that the more we listen to people's stories, the more we learn. Today, I'm actually going to start off with a question. What would you say if I told you that research shows that we are actually having way less sex than we used to, but we're watching way more porn? So less physical intimacy, but more of the virtual kind. Why is that? Well, when you have a question about porn, or specifically porn addiction, you go to an expert. So my guest today is Joshua Shea. Joshua is the most sought after speaker on porn and porn addiction in the world right now. He battled his own porn addiction for 24 years before getting clean for the last 8 years. He now counsels people who are struggling and their partners, also a trauma coach. He's written 4 books, done TED Talks, all of that. And I've got so many questions about this, so let's just dive right in. So hello, Josh, and welcome to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm very happy to have you here, and this is a topic that is it's one of those things that people hear it and they have strong feelings about one way or the other. And my first question for you is this: porn has been around; it's going to stay around. It's more easily accessible than ever. It's 80 to 90% of it's free. My question is, you know the dark side of it. You know the sort of the underbelly of it.
Right.
Is it possible, in your opinion, for people to watch porn in a healthy way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess I should actually backtrack that and say, I don't know if there's a way that makes you more healthy than you were before you started. I think there's a not unhealthy way to watch. Just like I believe that there are people, I was also an alcoholic, but I know there are people who can have 1 or 2 beers and it not affect them. Just like I can walk into a casino and I can play roulette for 15 minutes and then walk away and think nothing of it. So yeah, there's absolutely the chance of being able to watch pornography without any negative repercussions.
That's what I would think. And I think a lot of people feel that way because a lot of people, probably most people, can kind of watch a little bit here and there and enjoy or not enjoy it. But I think there is this stigma. Anything that has sex or nudity is going to carry some stigma. And I think there are people who will say, probably because there has been, I will say there's better porn than others. And I don't just mean, quality or storyline. I mean, in terms of there's some that have maybe violence or misogyny or things like that.
97% of it has violence and misogyny.
So that's not okay. I mean, that's the sketchy part of it, I guess. That's the part that a lot of people would say is damaging. But there's still a difference between something that isn't great to see, because a lot of our movies have violence and misogyny too.
Absolutely.
So it's that fine line between, not even a fine line. There's a big difference between just stuff that's maybe not palatable for some and really offensive and addictive. And those are the dangerous part comes with addiction, correct?
Yes and no. It's really what people don't realize who are recreational users. And these are the people who use pornography as a surrogate for actual sexual contact. It comes with masturbation 90 to 95% of the time. It is a way to just essentially get off. And that's totally cool. But for those of us who are or were addicts, it has very little to do what's on the screen once you get into your addiction. It really is. As long as what's on the screen is going to release the dopamine, it's going to release the oxytocin, the serotonin, the endorphins, all of those pleasure chemicals in your head that the addict desperately is searching for, it doesn't matter what's on the screen, whether it's, nice, healthy, there's a term now called ethical porn, which I still don't know exactly what that means. But if it's that stuff and that's what's getting, an addict off, great. If it's the really dark stuff that, most of us would run screaming from if we saw in real life, it doesn't really matter. And I can speak that as someone who was an addict myself. I didn't care what was on the screen. I just cared that ultimately it delivered me the chemicals that I needed to get through my day.
Now, is it like drugs in the sense of, because when you talk about that, it releasing dopamine and things like that, we hear that with drugs, you need to take more and more and go harder and harder because your body gets used to it. Does it work like that for porn too, where you need to sort of up your game
like
every
that
time?
For anything that is classified as a true addiction, and addiction is a brain disease. That's exactly what happens. It's why the gambling addict has to go $10 a hand of blackjack and then 50 and then 100. It's why, I eventually stopped drinking beer as an alcoholic, because it wasn't doing anything for me anymore. I had to move on to the harder stuff to feel anything. Pornography is the exact way. What starts out very vanilla, what starts out very plain, eventually that doesn't do it for you anymore. And you have to keep ratcheting it up and making it, more unique. And like I said, any of us who have been to any website that has all the different categories of porn, some of them are just downright scary sounding, but that's where you're going to find your people who have bigger problems with pornography, because they're looking for something novel and something new to get them off. Okay,
so now that you say that, I'm thinking now it's super easy to find porn. You don't have to pay for it if you don't want to. There's a million different, you can get it on your phone, you can get it everywhere. But if you go back a few decades, and it was harder to find, I'm just curious, being an addict, a porn addict back then when it wasn't as accessible, and being one now, is it, saying is it harder seems weird, but does it make it more challenging for an addict now because you can go anywhere and see it?
We give every 10-year-old child the greatest pornography computer that's ever been invented in the smartphone, and we send them out into the world and say, good luck, son, good luck, daughter. That's not the way that it used to be. Even though at 14 years old, I was able to rent hardcore pornography from a video store, a little mom and pop I found, much like I was able to buy beer at the little mom and pop convenience store. And, God bless the early 90s. The thing is, my parents never gave me porn. My parents never gave me alcohol. We are basically giving our children pornography the moment that we give them the internet. And that has been the ultimate difference in, and not just the internet, but high-speed internet. The ability to see an unending supply of porn, which is really what's out there. You could go on to the most popular site, which is Pornhub, and you literally have 10 to 12 lifetimes of porn that you could watch 24/7 and never pay a dime. And that's on one site. So that's really where the world is now compared to 20 years ago.
Is there any kind of maybe positive part that we're kind of taking a little bit of the taboo out of it? Maybe because it's
I don't know if we're taking the taboo out of it yet. I mean, I can tell you as somebody who both was an addict and somebody who was out there trying to talk about this stuff, how many people still are naked people doing naked things. I don't want to have anything to do with that. True. Don't talk to me about it. I'm not, you can't come on my show. You can't come speak at the library. You can't come do this or that, because there are still so many people out there who are scared to death of it. This world is run by old white men who were the ones who were getting the magazines back in the day. It's not being run by the 20-year-old people who are looking at porn nonstop. So there's still a big gulf that we need to fill with education and with making this a little bit more understandable. For the young people, the young adults, 20, 25 years old, the people who don't remember a world before the internet, they can talk about this. They can take this seriously. They recognize it's a problem among their demographic. But once you get above 40, 45 years old, This is the group that's never heard of OnlyFans. This is the group that doesn't know what Pornhub means. This is the group that has had their head buried in the sand, and that's where they're going to comfortably stay because they have had a puritanical upbringing, and it's just easier for them that way.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it, because what we need is education and communication around it. But it's like you said, anything that has to do with sex or naked bodies is terrifying or just bad. Yeah. It's just wrong. It's dirty. It's wrong. But the problem is it's because we're not educated around it. We're not comfortable around it. So people are reaching out for help. People need that information. And it's that reticence to talk about it that's keeping us in the dark. I want to ask you, because you struggled for a long time with this. I'm curious that the very first time you came into contact with any kind of porn. So I want to know about that and how old you were. But my question about that is, was there something where you watched it and immediately something clicked and you went, oh, like there was something it lit, or was it something that built up?
No, excuse me. I'm one of those types who I try something the first time and I am hooked the first time. I was 12 years old. My older cousin, he showed me a couple hardcore magazines, and, I had HBO, so I knew what naked people looked like, and it was not a big deal, but there was something about when he showed me those magazines when I was 12 years old, it was like a light went off. And I tell you, the only other time I've ever felt this way in my life was 2 years later, the first time I ever got drunk. And it was like a light shined from above and said, no matter what happens in your life, you have just discovered the answer to something. You have discovered something that is going to make you feel better. You have discovered something that is going to usher peace and happiness into your life. Good God, you have found it, my son. This is exactly what you've been looking for. And that was alcohol. That was pornography. I've never felt that with another thing in my life. And I think that's why for 24 years with porn, 22 with alcohol, whether I was in school, whether I was early in my career or later, whether I was dating, whether I was married, whether my kids were born yet or not, none of that mattered. I always had my equal crutches of porn and alcohol that were always waiting for me. And I learned how to hide it from everybody. And I learned how to feed my addictions in a way that nobody would find out. And if people were getting close to finding out, I'd just gaslight the hell out of them.
Wow. So nobody around you knew either one of them?
Towards the end, the alcohol became more and more clear. Especially, and I ended up losing my job. That was the very rock bottom. I ended up losing my job because of the alcohol. But when people are noticing you're an alcoholic, it's even easier to hide the fact that you're a porn addict, because with alcohol, you smell it on the person. They're slurring, they're not walking straight. You can't tell somebody who's just been using pornography from 5 feet away the way you can with an alcoholic.
Well, see, that's an important thing to talk about, because I think that a lot of people also confuse liking something a lot and being addicted to it. There are people who do enjoy drinking, but they're not alcoholics, who they can spend a whole day playing video games, but they're not addicted to it. So what did it look like for you? What did the addiction look like for you?
My addiction for me, during the day, it was alcohol, because that was socially acceptable. Any way that I could have. In my last 5 or 6 years of being an addict, I was the editor and publisher of 3 different magazines here where I live in central Maine. So I was very well known. People took me out to lunch all the time. I had happy hour dinners all the time. I was always at some sort of awards dinner or something where people were just buying me alcohol to kiss my butt. And it was wonderful for an alcoholic, and I could just constantly drink all day long. I actually only used porn once I got home, once my wife and my kids were asleep. Once I had that next buzz on, I'd pour myself a big tumbler of Red Bull and tequila. I would then get my laptop and head over to the couch and begin to look at porn. That was usually at 1 a.m, and I would watch for anywhere between 2 and 3 a.m. That was the only way that I knew how to unwind at the end of the day, whether it was taking place at midnight or 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. I could not go to sleep at night unless I
Mm.
had a very strong buzz and I had just used pornography. And I was absolutely a slave to that schedule, no matter where I was, no matter what was going on.
Okay, because that's what I'm thinking is that even just saying that, taking out the alcohol, okay, so 2 hours a night porn. I guarantee there are people listening to this going, 3 hours. Well, that's not such a big deal. So, but with addiction, did it negatively impact your relationship? Did that negatively impact other relationships, your job, hobbies, things like that?
I think that it would have more had the alcohol not already done so.
Right.
I think that
It's kind of blurred lines to know what, yeah.
Exactly. It's like, people were like, you did such a poor job the last year or two in your job. And it's like, yes, absolutely. Because I was up all night. Was I up all night because of the porn or because of the alcohol? It was really both. And
Right.
it was one of those things where I needed that fix of the pornography. If I didn't have that fix, if I went to bed, I would wake up the next morning and I would go in late to work because I needed it. It
There
had
you
to
go.
happen in a 24-hour period. But today, now that I counsel both men and women who are porn addicts, there are people who watch 15 minutes a day, 3 times a week who are addicts. And there are people who can watch 5 times a week, an hour each time that aren't addicts. So I really caution people to not put it into a box of frequency or duration. It ultimately has to do with your relationship and your obsessive relationship
Mm-hmm.
with the subject, no matter what kind of addiction it is.
And I think that's important to say. I think also, I know for myself, my issues were food always. Yeah, you talk about alcohol and sex, and my issues were food forever. And then I had an issue with sex as well, kind of looking for validation through my
Yeah.
sexuality for a little while. And I did question at one point, like I thought, oh, like am I an addict? And the funny thing is that, and I'm open about it because I say it in my book, but I remember calling addicts line, and speaking to somebody who did not want me to go to the group because I'd be the only woman, right? Which for me was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'll be the only one.
Yeah,
I didn't get a
exactly.
lot of attention. Like that's not a deterrent to any dark. But but when he was sort of explaining certain things, I realized, oh no, I'm not, because there were a lot of factors there
Right.
that just weren't. So I think it is important, if anyone is kind of wondering, look, if it is negatively impacting your life, if it's putting you in danger, if it's putting other people in danger, I think that's something that you really need to look into. But instead of self-diagnosing, is to ask, right? Go to a specialist, go to an expert, go to somebody and look into it. And I hope that people aren't feeling too stigmatized around it, that they can speak with someone like you, for example, to get the answers that they
Exactly.
need.
And I tell you, it's really and I hate to be all frilly, but it's almost magical when I see somebody talk to me for the first time and you can see their body language. They're very tense, they're very unsure, they're very scared to talk about this for the first time. And as we talk, you can see them start to relax once they realize that I'm not going to judge them on what they looked at. I know that that doesn't describe who they are as a person. We are not the porn we look at. If we are, my God, I don't know how you describe who I am. We are just not that person. We are just not that people. And I understand as well that it does have that hold on you. It does get that obsessive hold. And despite the fact that you understand you're an addict, despite the fact you understand, I can see I am cruising towards a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. Well, there are no brakes, and it turns out even if you
Mm-hmm.
find them, you wouldn't use them anyway. And really, unfortunately, most people do end up crashing into that wall with addiction. And depending on what the addiction is, that can end in losing your friends, losing your family,
Mm-hmm.
financial loss, a loss of life. You can end up in jail. You can end up, having some kind of health issues for life, depending on what you're doing. It's really just such a bad deal that I can tell you, I avoided getting help for both of these things for so many years. And that's one of my biggest regrets in life now, is that I wasted so much of my life hiding who I was more from myself than anybody else. It's easy to play a character. I can be Mr. Magazine editor. For a little while, I was on my local city council and I could play Mr. Politician Man.
Mm-hmm.
It was when I was by myself very late at night, when all of the awards ceremonies were done, when all of the networking meetings were done, when the kids and wife were asleep. That's when Josh had to sit on the couch and deal with Josh. And that's when he needed the alcohol the most. That's when he needed the porn the most, because I ultimately wasn't happy with myself, wasn't happy with who I was as a person. And the only thing I could do was numb with the alcohol and then create a false sense of control with the porn, which is really the reason I used.
You know, we're so hard on ourselves. I think when we are struggling with things like that, it's just like you said, you're not the porn you watch. It's like any addiction. You know, I'm not my eating disorder. We're not our drug addiction. And addiction is awful, but we are awful because we're battling it. I mean, that's what we have to separate ourselves from our problems. And I think what's so tough is like you just said, you had to, when everything else was gone, it was you that had to deal with you. And so since it's so hard to deal with ourselves, we look for a way to escape that. And I think that as judgmental as society can be, and it could be pretty fucking judgmental, I still think, and what I've learned from sharing my story and from hearing other people, what I think is we are the hardest on ourselves. And there are things I'm sure you did, and I know I did, and I know other people who've done things that we thought, oh my God, who is going to respect me after this? Who will be able to look me in the face after I share this? And then if you take the chance and you find the right people, you will tell them and they will go, oh yeah, I've done it. Okay. Like, and you kind of, and just like you said, you see people go, oh, wait a minute. I just told Josh my most horrible, embarrassing secrets. And he's not going anywhere. He's not even looking. So I think it's so important that we keep just being able to, people like us who have a story, who aren't afraid to share it anymore. I think it's so important that we keep doing that, because I want people to know that the fear of our secrets coming out is way scarier than when they actually do.
It's so funny you say that, because 5 years ago when I started writing my first book, when I set out, originally I was planning to just do public speaking. It was only because of the pandemic that I segued into coaching. But I thought to myself, I better get ahead of this. I better write my book. I better book some speaking engagements fast, because this thing is going to start being talked about tomorrow. And here I am 5 years later going, where is anybody? You know, I'm really flattered that I'm the most sought after speaker on pornography addiction, but that's only because nobody can get Terry Crews because he's too busy. It's not that there's many of us out there who are doing this. I thought there would be so many more at this point. When you look at statistics, there was from 2021, it's a statistic showing that of men who use the internet, 91.5% look at porn at least once a month. Of women who use the internet, 60.2% look at porn at least once a month. How is it that we're not talking more about this? This is hitting over 18% of people who use the internet now across the board. They reach the level of dictionary addicted to pornography. And this doesn't even talk about all the different side effects that people have, all of the different, negative things that people start to carry with them from using too much pornography. I'm not anti-porn. I don't think that, that would be smart. That would be like banging your head against a wall. We have been looking at naked people as long as we could draw on cave walls. We have been looking at depictions and creating depictions of nudity and sex as long as we possibly could. That's never going to stop. And the most important thing to keep in mind is it's completely natural. But we have had this injection of technology over the last 2 decades, and you cannot tell me that the fact there's a kid right now who's seeing hardcore pornography, and then the time that you and I are having this conversation, he's seeing more hardcore pornography than his grandfather saw in his entire lifetime.
That's so true.
That's what we need to recognize, is that our little lizard brains have not evolved in 2 generations to handle the amount of sexuality that's being thrown at us, or to understand why those of us who are addicted, or those of us who maybe are approaching the line of addiction and are just, a little too far into it, for it to be healthy right now. Why are these people not learning anything about this? We teach about drugs. We teach about alcohol. We're starting to teach things about video games and too much of that. What would 30 minutes at the middle school level do to bring down these statistics? Even something like porn-induced erectile dysfunction. When you and I were younger, when I was 20 years old, males had males had erectile dysfunction at 20 years old between 2 and 4%. That was back in about 1995. Now, here we are a little less than 30 years later. Men who are 20 years old are experiencing erectile dysfunction at rates of 20 to 25%. Why is it 1,000 times worse than it was before? If you have any answer that you can prove other than hardcore pornography being fed to people high speed through the internet, I'd love to hear it, because I can't think of any other reason that's happening except that.
So is that because they're watching they're watching what they can experience in real life, and so it's harder for them to get off in real life, in real situations, because they're used to seeing these extreme?
Absolutely. Okay. We know two things. Number one, we know that the brain can't always tell the difference between a still photograph or a moving picture on a screen and something in real life. The brain just can't always tell the difference between that. We also know, having studied over the last 2 decades, that there is a phenomenon known as the Coolidge effect. And what this basically states is that an animal will have their libido towards another animal, male to female, reduced over time with the same stimuli. So if you see the same female again and again and again and again, you start to reduce the stimuli. So then you take porn. Well, there's a reason that nobody ever uses the same porn twice, largely. And that's because there's so much out there. There's always something new. Something new always feels better, always looks better. So the more that people keep using new porn, well, and then you get you with your real partner. Well, you've seen your real partner naked 1,000 times. There's nothing you haven't seen. If you've had sex with them 1,000 times, you know how this movie ends. It may be a good movie, but you know how this movie ends. And you don't with pornography. And then you start to see that there are genres like point of view pornography, where one of the actors is holding the camera, almost to make the viewer feel like they're part of the action. That's where you see a lot of these different factors congregating. And I think that's why the 3% erectile dysfunction rates back in 1995 have become 23% these days.
Wow. So we do need kind of responsible porn watching, because there is an excessive, there is a problem with viewing it in excess.
I think if we told 13 and 14-year-old boys about porn-induced erectile dysfunction, I think that we would see a great drop in it, because these 13 and 14-year-old boys, they don't want to get addicted. They don't want to have problems with their penis. They want a girlfriend. A lot of them don't even want a girlfriend to have sex with. They want a girlfriend to kiss. But if all they can get out there as they're hitting the peak of puberty is free porn, that's what they're going to use. And if we can let these guys know, hey, you can actually break your penis doing this. You think you're going to want to be with a girl? Do you think any girl's really going to want to be with you if you can't perform? If we could just tell 13 and 14-year-old boys this across the board, I think you would see double-digit drops in both porn-induced erectile dysfunction cases and potentially porn addiction cases completely. We're just not telling people how to use this stuff. We're just not telling people that, hey, there is a danger with it. And that's one of the things that when I go and speak at a church or a school or a library, there's always a parent who is there like, well, we put restrictions on our kids' phones, so we don't have to worry about this. And it's like, congratulations, there are 5 billion smartphones in the world, and you've locked down one of them. Yeah, you've almost single-handedly taken care of this problem for all of us. So we have to thank you. And The reality is it's not a matter of if your kid is going to see
Yeah.
porn. It's a matter of when. And what you can do is you can educate them correctly. And it's not the birds and the bees speech. That's what so many parents seem to get so squeamish about. You and I have been having a perfectly fine conversation now for half an hour about pornography, and we haven't graphically described a single scene, nor will we. You can talk about this stuff without getting really dirty about it. It's not that difficult. And you can talk to the child and let them know, hey, much like cigarettes, much like alcohol, we don't do this in the house if we're under 18 years old.
Right.
We don't, when you get older, you can make your own decisions, but my job as a parent is to look out for you. So, if you are using your iPad or you're at a friend's house and they're using, their telephone and you see naked people, you come let me know, because that's not safe for you. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to parent as now. It sucks that we have to do this in, the early 2020s, but you know what? In the 1950s, they hid under their desks because the bomb was going to drop.
Right.
Times change, things change. We have to adapt. And I believe part of parenting now has to include some pornography education and at least providing a warning that, hey, you are going to run into this stuff.
Well, I'll tell you, it's kind of mind-blowing to me, Joshua, because what I'm hearing, it's reminding me so much of when I started going to schools talking about body image and eating disorders. And much like you, I started back in 2007. So Facebook was just starting. There weren't the body positivity groups out there. There was nothing. And nobody would talk about it because it's not glamorous to talk about eating disorders. There's nothing sexy about it. So nobody wanted to talk about it. I was willing to talk about it. So I became the person to speak about it. But just like you were talking about how schools are like, I don't want you coming. I would have the same thing I started with elementary schools. And first I started with grade 4. And then a school asked me to speak with their first graders because it was such an issue. But I remember I would have a few parents say, I mean, if you go into their school, what if they're not thinking about their bodies? And I'm like, if you don't think they're thinking about their body image at this age, you're too late. And it's the same thing. I think there are people who think that if we bring up the difficult issues, then they've never thought of it before. So we're going to put it in their head. So I was going to put it, all of a sudden they were going to be struggling with their body image. If you mention porn addiction, oh, they've never heard of porn. Now they're going to, so it's this fear that's not based in fact at all. It's pure. Exactly. And I have to say one thing, because it was so funny to me when you're talking about how if you would say to boys, listen, if you get into porn, too much porn, it's going to affect your penis. I remember thinking way back when too, when at the time, I don't know if it still is, but teenage girls were smoking more than anybody. They were taking up smoking a lot of time. It was because they would not want to eat. So it was a way to deflect from eating. And I remember thinking, okay, forget about putting on cigarette packets that you're going to have problems with pregnancies. Forget about putting pictures of deteriorating lungs. Say, if they said you will gain weight if you smoke, I guarantee they would stop smoking, because at that age, you're way more afraid. They were way more afraid of gaining weight than they were of lung cancer 30 years from now. So it's so funny that again, these are the things that you need to talk about with kids. And people think that they're too young, and they don't realize that the negative messages they're getting are coming in very fast. And so our positive ones, to deflect those, have to be louder and sooner. Right?
Oh my God, absolutely. You are 100% correct. And I truly believe that if people had been parenting, and I don't want to, judge anybody who does anything out there, but I believe that if parenting had included pornography, had included more body positivity, you probably would not be seeing the influx of all of these cam sites. You would not be seeing the influx of sites like OnlyFans. Because while we can talk about how, we were raised in a very conservative time and our parents and grandparents were even more conservative, I think a lot of what Generation X did, which is, my generation, I think we stood by and just watched the world burn down and said, well, we're not really going to do to our kids what our parents did to us. So we didn't, but we didn't do anything. And instead of bringing the where the sexual kind of litmus test of the world was very conservative, and we probably could have made it more liberal to be more healthy. It swung liberal so far to the other side that, when you and I were in school, if there was a picture of the buff football player and his cheerleader girlfriend at the beach, him in his little short shorts and her in her bikini, that picture would have been passed around the lunchroom like it was currency. And oh my God, did you see the picture? Did you see the picture? Nowadays, because of social media, every 15 and 16-year-old boy and girl is expected to have these half-naked pictures of themselves online. And so you tell me, your 18th birthday and the day before, what's the difference? Well, if you drop your top, it's probably about $1,000 on OnlyFans. And unfortunately, we've got so many people out there who were not raised with, I'm not even going to say conservative sexual values, but any sexual values, any respect for their bodies, that, hey, I can go ahead and just sell all this stuff. And what I really fear, and like I said, I don't have any problem with anybody who decides to do that. It's completely legal. But what I worry about is, are these going to be the pornography addicts of tomorrow? And what is the repercussion of doing this much selling of your body online, the kind of a do-it-yourself porn? What are the repercussions of the people who are doing it now, 20, 30 years later? We just don't know, because we've never been in a world like this before. That's what I fear. Prior to the pandemic, on January 1st, 2020, there was 300,000 people worldwide making content on OnlyFans. As of January 1st, 2022, that's only 2 years later, there was 3 million people making content online. And we don't know what the fallout of this is going to be. I'm not worried that, 20 years from now, someone finds your photo. I think we're way beyond that. There's just way too many photos out there. It doesn't matter. What's going to happen? Someone's going to say, your mom had a nice rack 20 years ago. Yeah. That's all that's going to happen. But what I'm worried about is what happens to mom's psyche 20 years later. What made mom do that? What happens when mom can't do that anymore? That's what I worry about. Does that hurt mom's body image? Is mom going to continue to do this anyway?
Well, here's one thing I have to say, though, coming from sort of my perspective on things. What I will say is, this didn't start with porn or OnlyFans or even social media, because I can tell you, at least, not that it's good, I shouldn't say at least, but the difference is now it's overt, right? We are seeing young influencers, quote unquote, what the heck is that? That they show themselves, then they get paid for it. So then, of course, a younger girl's going to go, well, if I can show my ass for free, or I can show my ass on a bigger platform and get money and then get deals with different companies, why wouldn't I do it? But here's the thing. Back when I grew up in the 80s, I remember seeing models who were 14 years old, who looked like they were 22 years old, who were sexualized to sell cars and jewelry and whatever for advertisers and for marketers, mainstream. And so we as women have been objectified and sexualized forever. And the problem there, it's even worse to me because it's insidious. There, it's quiet. It was part of our norm. So we've been growing up believing that we need to be a certain way because it was the norm. That's why there were so many issues, because it wasn't Pornhub that was telling us that we have to be attractive. It was name any friggin' jewelry company, makeup company, perfume company. They were the ones. And like you said, run by middle-aged white men who are profiting off it. And so there's a part of me that's like, okay, so if we're going to be objectified anyway, I have an issue with it being almost slut shamed, in the sense that if a woman is objectified but she's making someone else money, that's okay. But if a woman decides to show her own body and she's getting the money for it, then somehow that's wrong. And I have an issue with that. So I think it's such a big issue. I mean,
I can appreciate that, but the one difference that I'll make here with you is that the third book I wrote, which is called Porn in the Pandemic,
Mm.
I actually went and I looked and I interviewed a lot of people who were going on to OnlyFans, who were starting onto cam sites. And I'll tell you what actually scared me. And like I said, if you want to make your money and you want to do it legally, that's cool. I think about it before you do it. We don't know what the long-term effects of this are, but go ahead and do this. What actually scared me was about 4 months later, after I interviewed a bunch of these women who were just starting, and men, to be honest, who were just starting. 4 months later, I started talking to them, or I went back and talked to them, and some of them were still very money oriented, very much about the bottom line. But there were those others who were like, I couldn't get a date in real life before I started doing this. And now I've got men from all over the world telling me how sexy I am. Or I've got women, there are women who are actually offering me marriage, and I can't get a date with a real girl around here, but I've got women who want to fly me across the world and marry me. Those are the ones who I really worry about, because they stopped doing it for the money. They started doing it for the attention. They started doing it for the love. And what I really heard from many of them, they were doing it for the dopamine hit. And that's why I think ultimately, when it comes to the pandemic, I don't think that all of the thousands or millions and millions of new people who started watching pornography is going to be the long-term story. I think the long-term story is going to be that we are going to discover that pornography addiction is just as rampant in the producer community as it is in the consumer community. That's what I think my real fear is. All of these people who went to OnlyFans, men and women, all of these people who are doing the cam sites, how much of this is money and how much of this is just a pornography addiction?
Absolutely. I guess it's that the difference of when what you do becomes who you are.
Exactly.
Right. And when you can separate what you're doing and when it becomes your entire identity and your whole value system, and you're basing your worth on how many men contacted me today and why are there only 22 on my site when there were 45 yesterday, and what am I doing wrong? What do I have to change?
Hey,
it's
I
scary.
ask myself those same questions with TikTok every day.
I know, right? But it's true. It's such a bizarre time that we're living through with this. Do you think? What did you find was the catalyst to you getting better? What do you think? Was it something that was there a void that you were trying to fill? What? Oh, and one more thing before you start.
Okay.
Okay, so you were dealing with the alcoholism and the porn addiction. Now, did you? I'm assuming that you had to deal with one before you dealt with the other. Did you have to get off of I think it would be really hard to do quit cold turkey both at the same time, or did you?
I quit both cold turkey 12 days apart. I went to rehab for alcoholism first. And I couldn't get pornography while I was there. So that certainly was a big help and a big jump. But again, I'm really an all or nothing person. And I recognized that I was going to have to quit both of these things at the same time if I was going to be successful at quitting either of them. Most of my clients who are only addicted to porn and don't have any other major addictions, most of them come off of it by weaning and slowly, getting it down over time, much like how most people quit smoking cigarettes. But I was a cold turkey guy. I had to just be that one day, okay, I am shutting this off. And I am such a stubborn son of a bitch that that's really the only way that I was going to do it, is to say, nope, you're going to stop right now. You are not going to do this again. And I can tell you, 8.5 years later, knock on wood, there's been not a single relapse for either.
So did you figure out what it was or is it just sometimes there's just nothing? It's just who you are, how you're built.
When it comes to pornography addiction, Dr. Patrick Carnes, who's kind of the, guru of this area and the groundbreaking guy who did all the early studies, he did a study in the early 2000s. Trying to remember the name. I can't off the top of my head, but I believe it was over 3,000 men in America that he looked at. And he found that about 70% of them who were porn or sex addicts had suffered some kind of physical abuse that resulted in long-term trauma. Over 80% suffered some kind of sexual abuse, and over 90% suffered some kind of mental or emotional abuse. And I can tell you, I absolutely suffered sexual abuse, and I absolutely suffered mental and emotional abuse when I was a little kid at the hands of a babysitter that I had. And when I discovered pornography, I think that pornography's first job for me was to kind of wrap all that up and just put it on a shelf and stick it away and think that it was all over. Now, we continue to use for different reasons, and our addictions evolve for different reasons. But when I started, that's what it was about. And I think internally what happens, this is just my theory, is that we tell ourselves, well, if the porn or alcohol or whatever it is that we're addicted to, if this can help put this trauma away, if it can tuck it away, at least for a while, well, when you have a bad day at work or a bad day at school, if the porn can put the trauma away, certainly the porn can help on a bad day. And then pretty soon it becomes, well, why does it have to be a bad day? Why can't it be a good day? Can porn turn a good day into a great day?
Right.
And that's what happens with our addictions. And pretty soon, I'm 30 years old using pornography every day. It's not for the same reason I was using when I was 13 years old, but over time, I have internalized that this is part of how I cope with life.
Yeah, it's something I'd heard years and years ago about addiction. It's rock bottom is when what you're using to kill the pain becomes more painful than what actually caused the pain to begin with.
Yeah. Oh, and most of my clients at this point are like, I don't even want to watch. I have to watch. It's like medicine. And you see that with alcoholics as well, where you can't function unless you have your fix. If you don't it's not a matter of getting a fix of boobs and butts. It's a matter of a fix of getting those chemicals. But the only way that you can get those chemicals is through the usage of pornography.
It's such a tough thing. I mean, and it is interesting to me that we could be talking about pretty much any kind of addiction, and the theme going through them is really the same. Because again, I'm sitting here having dealt and battled and recovered, thank goodness, from an eating disorder, and there's so much that I can relate to. And I'm sure with alcohol, and I said I kind of dabbled with the sex thing, but they're really, I think at the heart of it, it all comes from the same thing, which is why I think, again, the more that we hear people's stories who we think we may have nothing, like somebody can come into this thinking, I've never even watched porn, and then listen to you and go, oh, wait a minute, but I'm relating to this on a completely different level. So I think that's amazing.
And this is exactly why I also became a trauma coach, was because I put my first book out, and I thought that would be really the only thing that I contributed to the world of pornography. I was going to go back and just be a ghostwriter and a freelance writer. I got so many emails from mothers, from wives, from girlfriends, especially saying, oh my God, you fixed yourself. Can you fix my guy? And it's like, well, I can talk to him if he wants to, but I don't know. They're like, well, I'm having betrayal trauma. And I'm like, what's that? And I learned what betrayal trauma was, talking to the partners of so many porn addicts. And I realized that when it comes to porn and sex addiction, and a lot of women, view that exactly as they would infidelity. I think that these kinds of addictions hit very differently. You don't see people who are gambling addicts, their spouses can be absolutely angry at them, but they're usually not questioning, am I not good enough? Am I not good enough in bed? Am I not pretty enough? Am I not, what's wrong with me? Why did he become this way? What did I do? Well, nobody asks themselves that when their husband becomes a video game addict, but they do ask themselves that when it's a porn or a sex addict. And I found that so fascinating. I found so many of the stories so heartbreaking that I went and I got certified in betrayal trauma as well. And probably 40% of the clients I have are almost all exclusively female, who are dealing with the betrayal trauma from their spouse or their partner's pornography addiction.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even think of that. And that's so true. It's so, and especially again, oh my God, everything is so connected. But again, as women, and I know everyone goes through it, but predominantly it's been a women thing since way back when. But we're just told we're never enough. We're always told, well, we have to change. We're never young enough. We're never pretty enough. We're never thin enough. Our boobs are not big enough. Our
You never look like the girl on Cosmo.
Never, exactly. So then if your partner, if you're married to somebody who is, you're like waiting in bed for them and they're like, yeah, I'll get there. But then they don't get there because 3 hours later, they're still looking at somebody else on a screen. Oh my God. It's going to be very hard for women to say, oh, that has nothing to do with me. Right. So that is collateral damage that you don't even think about.
Absolutely. And that's what it's a little ironic. I often tell women who have partners that are addicts, I said, you're almost luckier that he's an addict because it doesn't have to do with what's on the screen. I know that there are plenty of guys out there who are turning their backs to sex with their partners because they would rather, recreate online with Pornhub or whatnot. But when they are a porn addict, it's just a means by which to get those chemicals flowing through their brain. And if they could get rid of it, they would. And unfortunately, they have a problem, but that problem is not you. So if there is any silver lining to having a partner who is a porn addict, they're not doing it because of you. It's those other women, it's those other men with partners who are using porn as a surrogate for sex. Those are the ones who need to worry about the fears you're having, and all very well placed. Nothing, not to minimize or diminish those fears whatsoever, but it's absolutely, important to recognize it has nothing to do with you whatsoever. Absolutely nothing.
Right, because the porn addict, it's not like they're going to find someone else that nobody is going to. Nobody would work. So
well, and the fact is, I always just use a simple math equation. I was 12 years old when I became an addict. I was 26 years old when I met my wife. How could she have anything to do with it? I was an addict for 14 years before I met her. How could she have anything to do with it? And I guarantee any woman out there, I have never heard of a guy becoming a porn addict over the age of 20 for the first time. Everybody knows before they're 20, 21 that they're an addict. Everybody is already pre-programmed. So if you met your husband at 26 or 34 or whatever, and you just discovered he's suddenly using porn and that it's a problematic usage, it has nothing to do with you whatsoever. He's just very good at hiding it. If I can hide it from my mom for 6 years, I could hide it from anybody as long as I wanted to.
Wow. So just because you mentioned it, so on a personal level, did you find that, what was the process like with you and your wife when you went into recovery? Because you were married when you went into recovery.
I believe that because she works in the healthcare field, she does understand addiction better than a lot of lay people. But I do know that if I had not done the work, if I had not tried to become a better human being, if I had not shown gains, if I had shown that I wasn't taking it seriously, I wouldn't have been around very long. But I took it very seriously because I very much valued the lifestyle that I had. And I recognized that I was finally at the point where if I didn't get my shit together, it was all going to disappear.
So I think the message, well, there's so many messages, but I think a really important message that you're hearing is that it's not unusual. I mean, I just have to say one thing. I found this interesting study that I thought was pretty funny, and something about how people who go to church are 26% less likely to watch porn. However, people who describe themselves as fundamentalists who are super religious are like 91% more likely to watch porn. So people are watching it.
People are watching.
I mean, it's not the creepy guy that you work with that you think might be watching porn. It's out there. So it's not about everybody. Getting rid of it. Yeah. It's just building the education, not being afraid to educate people around it. And then once we're educated around it and we've taken some of the fear around it, then we can talk about it. And if people do need help, they won't be afraid to get it.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. I mean, the reality is we're all naked under these clothes. You line 100 of us up right in a row. Some are going to be prettier. Some are going to be uglier. Some will be taller, shorter, fatter, thinner, darker, lighter. but basically we're all kind of the same.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, demystify nudity, if you can stop making it such a kind of thing, I think we're going to go miles in bringing back these really scary numbers of addiction.
And the first part is just talking about it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like you said, people, they're just so afraid to talk about it. Okay, so people want to reach you. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Hit my website, paddictrecovery.com. That's the letter P, addictrecovery.com. You can send me messages through there. There's access to all of my socials. You can buy my books. And if you're interested in coaching, be it for porn addiction or for betrayal trauma, you can set up a consultation right there.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. And I'm hoping that that anyone listening got what they needed and will reach out to you if they want more information. So thank you for joining me on How to Ruin Your Own Reputation, Josh.
Thank you, Marcy. I appreciate it.
Okay, take care, and I'll see you all next week. Don't forget to subscribe to How to Ruin Your Own Reputation, available now everywhere you get your podcasts.